If you're experiencing the second act slump, the plot is likely not the problem, but bear with me because you only need to answer these 6 questions to get out of the slump, and I will share them with you in this video. I spent weeks trying to fix my second act. I added more action and different scenes, but at one point I just noticed that I didn't enjoy anymore writing the scenes that I had planned out. The story just didn't work for me anymore, it didn't excite me. And I realized that I'd written 27,000 words of my current work in progress into the wrong direction. Yeah, that was really frustrating. And it's all because I lost focus on what matters the most in a story that really keeps the story alive, and that is character development. I didn't know who my protagonist Cleo should become by the end of the story, by the end of the novel, and I also didn't know anymore how the second act was gonna transform her. So in this video I'm gonna share what I've learned and how you can fix your second act by focusing on character development and not so much on plot structure. Now make yourself a coffee, a cup of tea, whatever you like, and also prepare a notebook and something to write, because I'm gonna share some questions with you in this video that will help you brainstorm and understand how you can make changes to improve your second act. Here's what most writers do when the middle part of a story slows down. They add another scene that has a lot of tension, like an action scene or a betrayal or some revelation. And that's not wrong. These things can definitely add tension and interest to a story, but they remain empty if they are not planned to support the growth need of the protagonist. And readers and writers alike, they feel this, even though we can't always name it. When actually the question we need to answer is not what comes next, what happens next, it's who is the character becoming? And this creates a completely different dynamic in the story. If your second act feels lifeless and stalling, ask yourself this question first. What belief does my character, my protagonist, still have to let go of? You can write this down now and brainstorm later, or you can also pause the video and just think about this right now. A lot of writers imagine the act 2 as a list of scenes, like a list of actions. It's like an obstacle and then a bigger obstacle and an even bigger obstacle until the hero reaches the midpoint. And that's not necessarily untrue. On paper, this is what it looks like, but there is something underneath that is missing. Because the second act is not really a sequence of actions, it is a lie that's being dismantled. Because think of it this way, your character enters Act 2 with a false belief, something that is holding them back and blocking their development. Now I'm gonna give you a few examples of these false beliefs so you can imagine what it really is. So these could be things like, I am all by myself, I can only rely on myself. I do not belong anywhere. These are very common feelings, beliefs that a lot of humans also share, but our characters, they also have such beliefs, just like we do. Or it could be something like a prejudice, maybe in a fantasy world that could be like all orcs are evil and killers. And maybe this is a romantic story with an orc and the character is going to learn that this is a wrong belief. In principle, your character can have any kind of false belief. The important thing is that this belief is rooted in their backstory. It needs to be explained somehow. Where is it coming from? Because the protagonist, the character, creates this belief at a certain point in their life to protect themselves from disappointment or from rejection, anything like that. Any negative experience could trigger this false belief. So you take this false belief and you structure all the events of the second act around attacking this belief, taking it apart bit by bit until the protagonist understands that it's false and is ready to move on to something else, to the truth. Let me give you an example from my own novel to make this concept more understandable. So my main character, Cleo, believes that happiness means to always be on the run, always collect new experiences and never sit still, because she is avoiding certain feelings that she doesn't want to face. So what I'm gonna do is to center all of the scenes in Act 2 on attacking this belief that she has. One scene teaches her warmth, where she has to stay somewhere long enough to feel welcomed, and that actually makes her feel uncomfortable. Another scene teaches her stillness, where she cannot chase anything and she cannot move, where she actually is forced to sit with her own thoughts. And another scene teaches her belonging, how good it feels to actually open up to somebody and stay with people long enough that you can feel part of something. So this forces her in the end to deal with who she is herself. And that way the plot basically writes itself, because the focus is no more on, oh, what cool thing could happen here, what could I do next? The focus is always on, how can I attack the protagonist's beliefs? And this is where it gets even more interesting, because the false belief doesn't only live in the protagonist, it lives in every single supporting character of this story. It lives in the antagonist, the mentor, the friends, all of these characters. And all of them have a different answer to the main question that is asked by this story. For example, in my novel, let's call it Project Nymph, the main question is, what makes life meaningful? And each of these characters has a different answer for that question. The antagonist, for example, believes it comes from power. The love interest believes it comes from connection. The mentor believes it comes from wisdom that is collected over a long period of time. And society itself, the world the protagonist moves through, believes it comes from order and from separation in my world. And my protagonist, Cleo, at the beginning of the story, believes that it's freedom, a string of exciting experiences. That's her meaning of life in the beginning. And with that mindset, every conflict becomes instantly more meaningful, because the characters are not just disagreeing, they're arguing the same question from different sides. So the supporting characters are not just there to hinder or support the protagonist, they put philosophical pressure on the protagonist to answer the main question of the novel for him or herself. And each of them represents a version of what the protagonist could become. So to sum it up, the purpose of Act 2 is not only to move the plot forward, it is to destroy the protagonist's old worldview. And once the old worldview is gone, the protagonist can finally grow into a new version of himself. And that's the whole point of the obstacles as well, to test again and again if the hero or the heroine has actually let go of these old beliefs, if they have really managed to. And they will fail in the beginning, but in the end, when they're moving on to Act 3, they will be ready to take on the final challenge. Now let's get to the more practical part. So here's a tool that I like to use when I look at a scene in Act 2. And I ask this question before I write the scene and also when I reread it. And the question is, can my protagonist stay the same after this scene? If the answer is yes, your scene is probably decoration. It probably has some interesting dialogue or world building, but if your heroine, if your hero walks out unchanged or unpunished, then this scene doesn't really help your story move forward and your character growth. Now let me read to you the 4 questions I ask myself every time I write a chapter. What belief is being challenged? Which lie is this scene attacking? Number 2, how does this change my protagonist? What does she realize or learn? Number 3, what new behavior does this lead to and how does she act differently afterwards? And number 4, how does this change her relationship with the people around her? What shifts between them? The last thing I want to leave you with is this. So far, everything we've talked about was about why. Now let's talk about the how. If you plan your second act as an emotional arc and not just a sequence of events, you can imagine it in 6 stages. The first one I call the first crack. So this is the first time your protagonist's beliefs are being challenged, and they probably dismiss it at this point. Let's call the second stage questioning. This is a scene where the protagonist really starts doubting their belief and they cannot so easily dismiss it. The next stage is rejection, a scene where the protagonist actively pushes the new truth away. They stick with their old belief, but their old belief fails them. This is often the darkest part of the second act. And here the protagonist usually knows that their belief is failing them, but they choose it anyway because to them the alternative is terrifying. After that, a scene happens that proves the new truth to them in a way that is the most powerful, so they actually start believing it. And then in the next scene, they commit to the new truth. They choose it, but this choice comes with a cost. And at the last stage, the hero or the heroine, they are prepared for this third act. They are prepared to face what comes for them in the end. But I promised you 6 questions. And now here they are. Let's talk about the 6 questions that will help you fix your second act. Now the first one is, what is the lie? The lie that your protagonist lives in. And then the second one, what is the truth that will be proven that they will start believing throughout the process of the story? And the third question is, what is the first crack? What's the first time that they start doubting their belief? Then which scene makes them doubt it? And which scene eventually makes them reject it? And finally, which scene proves the new truth in a way that the protagonist cannot look away anymore and starts to believe it? If you can answer these questions, you have created now an emotional arc for your Act 2. And this is what the second act is all about. It's where the promises are kept that were being made in Act 1. It's where the questions are answered that were opened up in Act 1. And it's where the character gets prepared for what waits for them in Act 3. If you stayed all the way until here, I might as well introduce myself. Hi, I'm Effi. I'm an aspiring fantasy writer with a love for dark fantasy. And I hope this video helped you figure out your Act 2. And if you want more inspiration, come back here. I'll be working and figuring out my Act 2 now alongside you. See you in the next video.